Hello, boys and girls. Today, our learning objective is I can identify the most important points presented in two texts on the same topic. I can determine how the most important points in two texts are alike and different. What you need to know today are important points, two texts, the topic of a text, alike and different. We will look at informational text to determine what the important points are in that text. We will be looking at two texts at one time. We will be talking about the topic, and the topic is what that text is about. We will talk about how those two texts are alike and how those two texts are different, and how you will show that you have mastered the skill. You will identify the important points by looking in the text, and you will determine how those two texts are alike and how those two texts are different. What you should be able to do at the end of this lesson, you should be able to tell how two informational texts are alike and how they are different. Now, boys and girls, we have looked at informational texts before, and we know that informational texts are texts which give important information and factual information. It is true information. So what I want you to do for the next few seconds, I want you to turn and talk to someone. What does it mean to compare something? What does it mean to contrast something? Turn and tell someone what these two terms mean and give an example of each. All right, examples of comparing. When you compare, compare is another way of saying how two things are alike. For example, an apple and an orange are alike because they are both fruits. To contrast is another way of saying how two things are different. For example, apples and oranges are different because apples are red and oranges are the color orange. Also, another example of how oranges and apples are different or unlike is that you can bite right into an apple when you get ready to eat it. However, you have to peel an orange before you are able to eat it. So these are just two examples of how to compare, tell how two things are alike, and how things are different, how to contrast. And if you notice, there are certain words you can use when you're comparing and contrasting. For instance, when you compare, that's the same as saying how things are alike. And when you contrast, that's the same thing as saying how two things are different. Also, you may use the word unlike when you're talking about how two things are different. When you compare texts, you tell how they are alike. When you contrast texts, you tell how they are different. Now look at this item over here, or this picture. That is a picture of a Venn diagram. You can use a Venn diagram as well whenever you're comparing and contrasting. This is just a graphic organizer that you can use to classify your information in when you are comparing and contrasting. Many of you have seen a Venn diagram before. We know that in the middle of the Venn diagram, we put the information about how two things are alike. On the outside, we tell something different about each item. Today's guiding question is, what are the similarities and differences in two texts? Here's another word we can use when we compare. Similarities just means the same thing as how two things are the same or alike. And differences is just saying how to contrast things or how they are not alike. Okay, I'm going to show you how to compare and contrast two texts. I have two posters here with text. How are these two texts similar, which means the same, and how are these two texts different? Let's look at poster number 1. In this poster, we see a picture of a little girl and a lady. We're assuming that that's the mom. And we see that the little girl is watering plants and there are trees behind them. The text says, take care of planet Earth. Plant a tree. Poster 2, we see a picture of animals. And behind these animals, we see trees. So I'm assuming that these animals somewhere in the jungle or in the forest. And poster number 2 says, take care of planet Earth. The animals will thank you. Now I go back and I examine both texts or both posters to determine how they are similar, which means the same. And I look at the text and I see that the pictures both show that there are trees behind the people and the animals. And poster 1 says, take care of planet Earth. Plant a tree. Poster 2 says, take care of planet Earth. The animals will thank you. I noticed that what's similar about both texts, they both say, take care of planet Earth. So that is how I can determine how these two texts are similar. They're both letting us know that we need to take care of planet Earth. How these two posters are different is that poster 1 says, plant a tree. That's one way of saying how to take care of planet Earth. Poster 2 says, the animals will thank you. That's another way of saying how that's the way of saying how poster 2 is different from poster 1. Okay, so this is just an overall example of what I just said about poster 1 and poster 2 and how poster 1 and poster 2 are similar. The similarities, how they're like, the similarities of those texts is that they are both telling you to take care of planet Earth. The difference, or how they are unlike, or the difference of the text, is that poster 1 is showing that people can take care of the Earth by planting trees. Poster 2 is showing that you should take care of planet Earth because some places like the forest are an animal's habitat. Animals can survive better if their home is well taken care of. So we have just looked at the similarities and the differences of two texts. Now we're going to do this one together. We're going to compare. First of all, we're going to compare the two texts. What does compare mean? Turn and talk. Yes, compare means to tell how two things are alike. We're going to tell how both of these texts are alike. And the name of the two texts are, the first one is Don't Feed the Animals by Martin Reinhardt. And the second one is Our Animal Friends by Jerry Linto. So let's keep in mind how these two texts are similar because we're going to compare them as we're reading them. So let's read them together. You may want to pause your video so that you have time to read each text. So read along with me. We're going to read the first one. Don't feed the animals. I wonder what the topic is of this text. A lot of times we can find out the topic of a text by looking at the title. There's also a picture. The title says, Don't Feed the Animals. And the sign is showing animals, somebody feeding it, and there's a little cross there saying, Don't feed the animals, or showing us not to feed the animals. So we can assume that this text is going to be about, the topic is going to be about not feeding animals. So let's go ahead and read it together. Have you ever seen a chipmunk begging for food from a person? Many people might want to give the chipmunk a piece of their snack, but please don't. If we want to have healthy wild animals, then we can't give animals people food. People food can make wild animals sick. It also teaches them to need people to live. Instead of finding their own food, the animals learn to beg. When people aren't around, the animals don't know what to do. They forget how to live off the land around them. Okay, so that's text number 1, which is telling us don't feed the animals. And keep in mind as we're reading, we're thinking about ways to compare these two texts, how both of these texts are alike. So let's go ahead and look at text number 2, our animal friends. Let's read it together. We need to take care of our animals. One way to keep animals safe is not to feed them. Feeding them makes them come back for more. It keeps them from finding their own food. Another way to keep our animals safe is to be careful when driving. Many animals are killed each year by people driving too fast. Okay, both of these texts are talking about animals. One text number 1 is saying don't feed the animals. Text number 2 is saying the animals are our friends. So we have to determine what is the most important information in this text. What are the most important points that lets us know how these two texts are alike? Because remember, we are comparing. Okay, so we go back and skim over the first text. Let's just kind of skim and let's look and see what it is that text number 1 is talking about, that text number 2 is also talking about. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to think about how these two texts are alike. And I want you to use evidence from the text. That means you have to go back to the text. And I want you to share your information with someone about how these two texts are alike. Make sure you're going back and reading it or skimming over it. Okay, let's talk about how these two texts are alike or how they are similar. The two texts are alike because they both say that feeding animals makes them stop finding their own food. Again, these two texts are similar or alike because they both say that feeding animals makes them not stop finding their own food. Now, the evidence from the text says, according to according to the text, don't feed the animals. That's text number 1. It says, instead of finding their own food, the animals learn to beg. When people aren't around, the animals don't know what to do. Now notice I went straight back to the text and I pulled my evidence or cited my evidence directly from the text. I didn't make it up. I went back and I reread text number 1. And it pretty much says that the animals cannot find their own food if we continue to feed them or if we feed them. According to the text, our animal friends, that's text number 2, it says, feeding them makes them come back for more. It keeps them from finding their own food. So let's go back to text number 1 and 2 and see if this is correct. Let's go back and see if this is how both texts are similar. So I'm going to go back to the text again. So we go back and we skim, which I hope you took a moment to do. And we look back over the paragraph 1 in text 1. This one just saying, have you ever seen a chipmunk begging for food? If you kind of skim down, it says, please, but please don't. Okay, so we know the first paragraph doesn't really tell us why not to give them, why not to feed them. But if we go to the second paragraph, it gives us an explanation as to why we shouldn't feed them. Okay? It says that it makes them sick. It teaches them they need people to live. It, instead of finding their own food, the animals learn to beg. Okay? And so we go to text number 2 and we skim this because we want to find information over here that is similar to the information over here. So we go here under our animal friends, and it says one way to keep them safe is not to feed them. Feeding them makes them come back for more. It keeps them from finding their own food. So if we look at the information in text number 2, it says here it keeps them from finding their own food. We go back to text number 1 down here. It says instead of finding their own food, the animals learn to beg. So basically the information in paragraph 2 in text 1 and the information in text 2, paragraph 1 is pretty much saying the same thing, that they will not find their own food, or it keeps them from finding their own food. So this is how we can compare two texts. Again, remember to go back and cite your evidence from the text. Good job, boys and girls. Let's move on. So we just finished talking about how they are similar. Okay. Now let's talk about how they are different. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the text again. We've already read it once, and we've already skimmed over it a second time. Okay, so we want to look at the text again. We want to revisit the text again because now we want to determine what are they saying differently from each other. Okay, so don't feed the animals. What is it saying differently from our animal friends? So I'm going to give you a few moments, and I'm going to, as you're taking a few moments to determine how text 1 and how text 2 are different, I'm going to just read it. So I want you to be thinking about how text 1 and text 2 are different from each other now. So we're going to contrast the two texts. Contrast means to what? Contrast means to tell how they are different. So have you ever seen a chipmunk begging for food from a person? Many people might want to give a chipmunk a piece of their snack, but please don't. If we want to have healthy wild animals, then we can't give animals people food. People food can make wild animals sick. It also teaches them to need people to live. Instead of finding their own food, the animals learn to beg. When people aren't around, the animals don't know what to do. They forget how to live off the land around them. I'm going to read text number 2 again because, again, remember, we're looking for how these two texts are different. Our animal friends. We need to take care of our animals. One way to keep animals safe is not to feed them. Feeding them makes them come back for more. It keeps them from finding their own food. Another way to keep our animals safe is to be careful when driving. Many animals are killed each year by people driving too fast. Now I need to think about what text 1 is saying that text 2 isn't saying. And that's how we're going to contrast and tell how they are different. So I want you to take a moment and turn and talk to someone and think about how text 1 is different from text 2. Make sure you cite your evidence from the text. Okay, let's talk about how these two texts are different. What information does text 1 give that text 2 doesn't? What information does text 2 give that text 1 doesn't? How are the two texts different? The texts are different because each text gives additional information that is not the same. This is the evidence from the text, how they are different. According to the text, don't feed the animals. That's text number 1. It says that people food can make wild animals sick. People food can make wild animals sick. People food is the food that we eat every day, like hamburgers and hot dogs and cookies and things of that nature. So they're saying that it can make wild animals sick. That's text 1. Text 2 didn't say anything about the animals getting sick from our food. Text 2 says, while the text our animal friend says, be careful of animals while driving. Many animals are killed each year by people driving too fast. Did we see this information in text 1 about keeping animals safe and that they can be hit by people driving too fast? No. So text 2 tells us about keeping animals safe because drivers kill animals each year. So these are the 2 examples of how both texts are different. Text 1 says people food makes animals sick, and text 2 says animals need to be kept safe because fast drivers tend to kill many animals each year. So that's how text 1 and text 2 are different. Good job, boys and girls. What did we learn today? We learned how to compare 2 texts to tell how they are alike. We learned that there are different words that we can use when we're comparing. We can use the words similar, same, or alike. It's the same thing as saying compare. We also learn how to contrast 2 texts, where you tell how they are different. The word contrast means different or unlike something, or you can also use the word not unlike. When comparing and contrasting, you may use a Venn diagram as well to classify your information. We can put the information of how they are alike in the middle, and we can put how they are different on the outside. Thank you, boys and girls, for tuning in. I hope that you have learned quite a bit about comparing and contrasting today. Take care.